She dialed 911, shouting into the phone that I was some kind of dangerous threat harassing her, maybe armed, maybe barricaded, all because I had the nerve to deny her access to my own home for a surprise, unauthorized inspection of my curtains. Yes, curtains. The audacity was almost impressive in its boldness. What Brenda, self-declared queen of neighborhood order, didn't realize was that the calm, composed voice answering her dramatic call belonged to none other than my wife, Sarah. And Sarah, ever the strategist with a badge of patience, decided that if Brenda wanted a crisis, she'd get one that would be burned into her memory. Living in a neighborhood ruled by a homeowners association, especially one as fanatical as ours, often feels like navigating a labyrinth built by someone obsessed with control and pettiness. When Sarah and I first settled into Willow Creek Estates, it all looked perfect. Trimmed lawns, uniform mailboxes glinting in the sun, and a peaceful stillness that gave off an air of harmony. We were, perhaps, too trusting. The order wasn't born from mutual respect or community. It was enforced by Brenda McLaughlin, HOA president and self-appointed enforcer of everything beige and bland. Brenda didn't just follow the rules, she created them, twisted them, and wielded them like weapons. She was in her late 50s, sporting a gravity-defying permanent wardrobe dominated by pastel pantsuits. Her favorite accessory, an HOA-branded lanyard she wore like a badge of officia, even just to grab the mail. In her mind, her authority was unquestionable, her judgment beyond scrutiny. We had early run-ins. She once issued a formal warning because our garden hose remained visible from the street 3 hours after watering, a violation complete with time-stamped photos. Then came an email saga over the exact shade of beige on our welcome mat. Ours was Sahara sunset, but the approved color, desert sand, a microscopic difference that might require lab equipment to detect. Each interaction was a masterclass in pettiness. The HOA guideline, as a thicker than a city's phone book, were her gospel, recited with religious fervor. She conveniently skipped parts that didn't serve her mission and invented others to fill in the gaps. Brenda especially loved going after newer residents, those who hadn't yet been worn down by her unrelenting micromanagement, or those like me foolish enough to request proof of her claims in writing. That, in Brenda's eyes, was a cardinal sin. She had this unsettling habit of peering into windows as she walked by. Not a glance, an extended stare, like she was inventorying your belongings for policy violations. Once, she left a note criticizing a decorative vase in our window, claiming it clashed with the uniform appearance of the neighborhood's north-facing Section 8. Sarah, who dealt with life and death calls as a 911 dispatcher, found Brenda's antics weirdly therapeutic. "At least my lunatics are having real emergencies," she'd say. Brenda just manufactures hers from boredom and an unhealthy obsession with paint samples. We learned to keep everything documented, emails only, paper trails always. We stayed quiet, complied when it made sense, and tried not to poke the bear. But Brenda mistook our silence for secrecy, as if we were hiding something truly outrageous. A secret pet alligator, maybe an illicit underground nightclub. Whatever her imagination conjured, it led to increasingly frequent inspections and surprise visits. She even started stepping onto people's porches, examining flower pots or giving railings an unsolicited shake to test their safety. Most neighbors simply sighed and let it happen. Resistance was exhausting, but for some reason, she fixated on us. Maybe it was the time I calmly corrected her during an home meeting. She insisted the HOA owned the first 5 feet of everyone's driveway. I pointed her to the exact section in their bylaws proving otherwise. The look she gave me could have soured milk at a distance. After that, her inspections of our property ramped up. This latest obsession, the one that led to her infamous emergency call, was over something so absurd it defied belief. She decided that our living room curtains, glimpsed in passing through a window, didn't meet an internal ambience standard, a standard that didn't exist in any written policy and seemed based solely on Brenda's personal taste. Brenda had a thing for seasonal decorations, mandating them, critiquing them, enforcing their rotation like some kind of overzealous holiday warden. It was Tuesday morning, my day off, and I was enjoying the rare luxury of a peaceful cup of coffee, completely unaware that a Category 5 brandistorm was about to strike. The doorbell rang with such aggressive urgency it jolted me. There's a certain kind of anxiety that comes with an unannounced ring when you live under the constant watch of an HOA, and ours was the big brother of neighborhood watchfulness. Peering through the peephole confirmed my worst suspicion. There she was, Brenda McLaughlin, posture stiff as a ruler, clutching her ever-present clipboard like a weapon of righteousness. Her expression was carved in stone, all grim resolve and judgment. Today's pantsuit was a particularly jarring shade of mint green, practically humming with self-importance. I took a calming breath and opened the door. "Brenda," I said evenly, doing my best to keep things cordial. "What brings you by?" Her beady eyes darted past me, clearly trying to get a glimpse inside. "Mr. Harrison," she began, her tone entirely devoid of civility. "I'm here to conduct a scheduled interior ambience compliance check." "Scheduled by who?" I asked, eyebrows raised. As far as I knew, I hadn't agreed to anything, nor had I received so much as a memo as something even her twisted interpretation of the HOA rules usually required. "I wasn't informed of any inspection," I said, maintaining my calm. "And to be honest, I'm a bit tied up right now." That was true. My coffee was rapidly cooling, and I was keen on preserving what remained of my peace. "This is an official HOA matter, Mr. Harrison," she huffed, puffing herself up like a bureaucratic blowfish. "All residents are obligated to comply. I need to review your main living spaces, specifically your window treatments and overall decorative cohesion." Yes, she actually used the phrase decorative cohesion. I nearly laughed out loud. "Brenda," I replied, leaning casually on the doorframe to underscore that she wasn't getting an inch past me, "I admire your commitment to cohesion, but unless you have a court order or can point me to a bylaw that explicitly grants you access to my private residence, you're not coming in. This is my home." I kept my voice polite, but firm. I knew my rights, and perhaps more importantly, I knew the HOA rules better than she assumed. Nowhere in the entire bylaw Bible was there a clause allowing surprise interior inspections without consent or valid concern, like structural damage visible from outside. Her lips thinned, her mint green suit somehow looking angrier by the second. "So you are refusing an authorized HOA inspection, Mr. Harrison?" she asked, her voice dropping to an ominous pitch. "I'm refusing to let someone into my home without a legitimate reason or legal authorization," I replied with a shrug. "There's a difference." What followed could barely be called a conversation. She repeated that it was her duty, her right. I kept calmly reiterating that she had neither legal grounds nor permission. Her logic spiraled in circles, each argument more absurd than the last. She claimed she'd received an anonymous tip about our curtains. That was rich. Our neighbors were kind, reasonable people. None of them would have indulged Brenda's nonsense, much less snitched. "A complaint about what exactly?" I asked. "That there two curtain." "Why?" The sarcasm slipped through despite my efforts. "Wrong move." Brenda thrived on opposition like a fire thrives on gasoline. "They appear to have a non-compliant texture under afternoon light," she snapped, tapping her clipboard for emphasis as if it held a notarized report from some kind of curtain texture authority. "And I have credible reason to suspect you may be using unauthorized curtain rod finials." Finials. She was actually going there. My patience, usually quite sturdy, was beginning to fray. "With all due respect, Brenda," I said slowly, "you're not seeing my finials, or my curtains, or anything else inside this house today. If you feel there's a rule violation, send me a formal notice citing the exact bylaw, and I'll have my attorney look it over." The mention of a lawyer made her twitch like she'd just stepped on a tack. "This is obstruction," she declared, voice climbing. "You are interfering with the duties of an official HOA representative. I feel threatened by your aggressive stance." I hadn't moved, still leaning on the doorframe, coffee in hand. I was the picture of calm, irritated, Sharia, but not even remotely threatening. "Threatened?" I asked, trying not to laugh. "I'm standing on my own front porch, asking you to respect our privacy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's what you're invading. You're the one being aggressive, showing up unannounced and demanding entry into my home without a shred of legal justification." That's when she said it. The words that shifted everything. Her eyes narrowed with vindictive satisfaction, and she hissed, "Well, Mr. Harrison, If you insist on being uncooperative and hostile, I'll have no choice but to call the authorities. Let's see what they have to say about your behavior." She brandished her phone like it was a badge, jabbing at the screen with theatrical flair. A small, wicked part of me, aware that my friend Sarah likely had dispatch duty that morning, almost wanted her to go through with it. "By all means," I said coolly, gesturing toward the phone. "Call them. Be sure to let them know you're demanding to inspect my curtain finials, and that I'm harassing you by declining a politely on my own front porch." Her expression contorted, morphing from smug to livid. "Oh, I will," she snapped, "and I'll tell them you're dangerous." "You wouldn't want your neighbors thinking you're some kind of troublemaker, would you?" She lifted the phone to her ear, glaring at me like she expected me to caveat to suddenly panic and beg her forgiveness, throw open the door, and offer a guided tour of my throw pillows and seasonal wreaths. Instead, I just stared back, expression unreadable, sipping my now lukewarm coffee. The line had been drawn. This wasn't about curtains anymore, not really, and Brenda had no idea she was stepping onto a battlefield far beyond the scope of her HOA fiefdom. Turning away with dramatic flair, she pressed the phone to her ear and launched into a loud, breathless report. I couldn't hear every word, but a few phrases floated back to me: uncooperative resident, refusing access, aggressive behavior, and of course, feeling unsafe. I imagined the unfortunate dispatcher on the other end, forced to absorb the theatrical hurricane she was unleashing. A sly smile crept onto my face as I pictured Sarah hearing Brenda's voice and realizing exactly what was happening. Later that evening, over drinks and a shared sense of cosmic justice, Sarah recounted the call with gleeful precision, and it was better than anything I'd imagined. Apparently, Brenda didn't just make a caller, she gave the performance of a lifetime. 911. "What's your emergency?" Sarah had asked, calm and collected as ever. "This is Brenda McLaughlin, HOA president of Willow Creek Estates," Brenda had shrieked, skipping pleasantries entirely. "I'm being harassed and threatened by a resident at 125 Willow Creek Drive. He's refusing to comply with HOA regulations and is acting erratically. I need police assistance immediately." Recognizing my address in a heartbeat, Sarah had to briefly mute her mic to keep from laughing. She tapped in the details, a little green light confirming the location, and began the official incident log. "Okay, Ms. McLaughlin," she said, her tone impressively neutral. "Can you tell me exactly how this resident is harassing or threatening you?" "He won't let me in his house," Brenda all but screamed. "I'm here for an official inspection, and he's blocking the door. He's being hostile and unpredictable. I don't feel safe." Sarah, following protocol, began asking the standard escalation questions, although she later confessed each one felt like setting up a punchline. "Is he making any verbal threats? Is he armed? Are you in immediate danger?" There was a beat of silence. Brenda, realizing that "he won't let me inspect his drapes" didn't exactly sound like a police matter. "Well, he's being verbally obstructive," she said finally, "and his tone is very menacing. And as for weapons, well, I can't see any, but who knows what people like him keep behind closed doors. Rule breakers can be very unstable." Sarah, ever the professional, remained composed. "Ma'am, refusing entry for an HOA issue is typically a civil matter, not a police emergency unless there's a direct threat or physical altercation." At this point, Sarah had switched to her de-escalation mode, that ultra-smooth tone that could calm a riot or, in this case, nudge Brenda right off a rhetorical cliff. "But he's harassing me," Brenda barked, frustration creeping into her voice. "I am a designated officer of the HOA. His refusal undermines community order. It's a societal breakdown in miniature." Sarah said she could actually hear the rustling of Brenda's clipboard through the phone as she likely gestured wildly to no one. "I understand that you're upset, Ms. McLaughlin," Sarah replied, still perfectly composed. Sarah's voice, that perfect blend of bureaucratic calm and barely restrained mirth, radiated through the phone like a warm compress over a migraine. "We will, of course, document your concerns," she said soothingly. "Can you describe his threatening tone more specifically? What exactly did he say that made you feel unsafe?" According to Sarah, this opened the floodgates. Brenda launched into a long, winding tirade about how my calmness was, in itself, an act of aggression. My refusal to submit to her legitimate inspection was, she claimed, a sign of something far more dangerous, deep-rooted nonconformity. She spoke of my allegedly unapproved window treatments with the grave intensity usually reserved for active bomb threats. Sarah listened with professional patience, her fingers clacking away as she logged Brenda's increasingly wild accusations into the dispatch system. "Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin," she said once Brenda had finally run out of steam. "We're taking your report very seriously. Units are being apprised of the situation in your area." This was, of course, artful misdirection. No one had been dispatched. But Sarah's tone let Brenda believe that the gears of justice had begun to turn just for her. From my front door, I saw Brenda lower her phone with a smirk of smug satisfaction. She looked at me like she had just won a war, her expression broadcasting, "You're finished." I leaned a little more casually against the doorframe, the irritation of earlier fading into something closer to anticipation. My wife, you see, was a professional and a ruthless one when the situation called for it. She had a sharp sense of justice and absolutely no patience for people who tried to weaponize bureaucracy. Brenda had just unknowingly given her the chance to teach a masterclass in the consequences of overplaying one's hand. And the best part? Sarah didn't need to bend a single rule. She'd simply give Brenda exactly what she was asking for. The self-satisfied smirk didn't last. 10 minutes ticked by. Brenda stalked the walkway like a zoo leopard, casting venomous glances at my door as if sheer disdain might cause it to burst open. But no sirens, no flashing lights, no law enforcement officers marching up the path to validate her power trip. She yanked out her phone again, this time jabbing at it like it had personally betrayed her. Back at the dispatch center, Sarah later told me the redial came through almost instantly. 911, what is your emergency? She answered, though she already knew. It's Brenda McLaughlin again. Came the shriek. Where are your officers? That man is still here, still refusing entry. He's probably destroying evidence as we speak. He looked out the window and laughed at me. To be fair, I had peeked through the blinds a few moments earlier, and yes, I might have smiled a bit, not out of mockery, more in the spirit of how is this my life right now? Brenda, however, took it as a direct insult and unmistakable confirmation of my villainy. Ms. McLaughlin, Sarah said, voice still soothing, as I mentioned before, officer availability can vary. Emergency response is prioritized based on immediate threat to life or property. Your report has been documented. That wasn't what Brenda wanted. Documented wasn't enough. She didn't want a report, she wanted action. She wanted sirens and stern voices. She wanted zip ties and Miranda rights. She wanted a scene. Prioritized? She screeched. I am the HOA president. Do you understand the precedent this sets? If he gets away with this, no one will respect the rules. There will be chaos. She was spiraling now. Flower beds will go unweeded. Mailboxes will be painted non-regulation colors. Do you want anarchy? Sarah, still composed, replied gently, Ma'am, I understand your position within your community. However, police intervention is governed by state law and municipal code. Refusal to allow an HOA inspection of curtain rods doesn't typically warrant emergency response unless there are aggravating factors. That was like poking a hornet's nest with a stick. Aggravating circumstances? Brenda sputtered. I'll give you aggravating circumstances. That Monty Harrisota, he has a very shifty look. He could be dangerous. For all I know, he's got an arsenal in there. He's barricaded himself. You need to send SWAT. My life could be in danger. Sarah raised an eyebrow. A SWAT team, for curtain rods. Just when I thought it couldn't get better. A SWAT team, ma'am? Sarah asked evenly, ensuring her words were clearly recorded. Are you stating you believe the resident is armed and poses a broken bar a significant, immediate threat requiring specialized tactical units? Brenda, now entirely immersed in her own melodrama, doubled down without hesitation. Yes, absolutely. He's clearly unhinged. You can't be too careful these days. Who knows what he's got in there? And I'm out here, exposed. I'm practically a hostage to his non-compliance. She paused, perhaps for effect or oxygen. Yeah, I think I need an airlift, she added breathily. The stress. It's overwhelming. He's created a hostile environment that could trigger a medical episode. Yes, an airlift and special forces. That's what's needed here. This is a serious threat to public order. A broken bar, and frankly, to my continued existence. Sarah later told me she had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. An airlift, special forces, over curtain finials and a neighbor's refusal to bow to HOA tyranny, Brenda had surpassed petty authoritarianism. She was now hurtling headlong into full-blown delusion. Understood, Ms. McLaughlin, Sarah said, her voice adopting a new weight, entirely genuine though not for the reasons Brenda imagined. You are now stating that the resident is potentially armed, has barricaded himself, poses a threat requiring tactical intervention, and that you require medical extraction due to the extreme stress of the situation. Is that correct? Yes, exactly, Brenda cried, mistaking procedural clarity for validation. Finally, someone who understands the gravity of this crisis. Send everyone. Spare no expense. This menace must be contained, and I must be rescued from thieves of this suburban siege. Very well, Ms. McLaughlin, Sarah said calmly. Her fingers danced across her keyboard, updating the incident report with exacting detail. Keywords were highlighted: armed, barricaded, SWAT, medical emergency, airlift, special forces, stress-induced. Based on your updated description of an escalating threat and your request for tactical and medical response, Sarah continued, we will now dispatch the appropriate resources. Please remain on the line if possible, and stay in a safe location. Then, with the serene composure of someone setting the final piece of a puzzle, Sarah initiated the next step. She called in her supervisor. Caller is adamant about the presence of weapons, she said, reading directly from her notes. Believes subject is barricaded, requests SWAT, special forces, and an airlift for herself due to emotional distress. There was, apparently, a long silence on the other end. The supervisor, Sarah told me later, likely scanned the call log and saw that it began as a civil matter involving a homeowners association complaint, then saw the escalation, and more importantly, the documented escalation. In Brenda's own increasingly fantastical words, protocol dictated that such claims had to be taken seriously at least at first. When a caller insists on the possibility of an armed, barricaded suspect and requests tactical response, the system errs on the side of caution. A large-scale response would be dispatched and downgraded as necessary once responders assessed the situation. Sarah didn't argue, she didn't embellish, she didn't need to. She simply allowed the system to do exactly what it was designed to do, based entirely on Brenda's exaggerated narrative. Brenda had wanted drama. She was about to get it, just not quite the way she imagined. The first sign that things were escalating beyond her control came in the form of a distant siren. Just one, at first a faint, but growing steadily louder. Brenda, still pacing on my front lawn like a general awaiting reinforcements, perked up. She clutched her phone like a sacred relic and shot a triumphant look at my window. See? She mouthed through the glass, brimming with vindication. They take my safety seriously. Then a second siren joined the first, and a third. Soon, the whine of multiple emergency vehicles rose in a swelling chorus, an urban symphony of urgency that echoed down our quiet suburban street, transforming Willow Creek Estates into the stage for Brenda's most dramatic performance yet. And I hadn't even stepped off the porch. My quiet suburban street, normally disturbed only by the hum of lawnmowers or the nostalgic jingle of an ice cream truck, was rapidly becoming the epicenter of a full-blown emergency response. The first two police cruisers came screaming around the corner, lights flashing, tires squealing. They skidded to a halt across from my house, diagonally blocking the road with practiced precision. Two officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters, scanning the scene like they expected a hostage to come flying out the window at any second. Brenda, now visibly vibrating with triumph, began waving frantically and pointing at my house. "He's in there. That's him, the dangerous one," she shouted, her voice slicing through the air with dramatic urgency. Before those officers could even approach her, another cruiser rolled up. Then came a larger, black SUV, of the kind that usually houses a tactical supervisor or a small arsenal. The cavalry was arriving in earnest. Neighbors, drawn by the sirens and flashing lights, began trickling onto porches and sidewalks. Confusion, concern, a few phones raised, capturing the spectacle. Mrs. Pine Henderson from across the street, who once baked us welcome cookies, looked genuinely distressed, her eyes wide with alarm. And then I heard it, the deep, rhythmic whump-whump of rotor blades. I looked up. Not a news chopper, a police helicopter. It banked low overhead, its downdraft tossing the trees and sending Brenda's precisely sculpted hair into a panicked frenzy. A searchlight swept across my yard before panning over the neighborhood. This had officially gone way beyond anything I could have imagined. Brenda, of course, was euphoric. She practically glowed, basking in what she clearly saw as the ultimate vindication. Not just ground units, but air support. This would be the highlight of her next home meeting. No question. She'd recount it with breathless pride how her quick thinking and brave leadership neutralized a dire threat to suburban civilization. More officers fanned out, some speaking into radios, others moving into perimeter positions. A few approached Brenda, who was now attempting to direct the operation like a community theater version of General Patton. Secure the perimeter, she barked, gesturing vaguely toward my meticulously landscaped azaleas. He could flee out the back. He's cunning. A fire truck siren blared as it pulled up a few houses down. Not because anything was on fire, of course, but as Sarah later explained, when there's a potential barricaded subject, fire and EMS units are staged nearby for scene safety and medical standby. Also await for right to breaching assistance. For curtain finials, the situation was galloping toward surrealism. An ambulance had also arrived quietly, and 2 paramedics stepped out, scanning the scene with looks that said, "What fresh nonsense have we been dragged into now?" At this point, I figured I should probably go outside before someone decided my drapes were grounds for a battering ram. I opened the front door slowly, stepping out onto the porch with my hands raised, palms out, in the universal "please don't shoot me, I'm just drinking coffee" pose. "Officers," I called calmly, "I'm the resident, Mark Harrison. I believe there's been a broken bar, rather large misunderstanding." A senior-looking officer, a sergeant, judging by his insignia, approached cautiously, his partner close behind, hand resting lightly on his holster. "Sir, we received a report of a disturbance, a potentially hostile individual, possibly armed," he said, watching me carefully. "That you?" "That would be me, according to Miss McLaughlin over there," I said, nodding toward Brenda, who was now gesturing wildly and arguing with another officer, demanding they storm the residence immediately. "The only hostility, Sergeant," I continued, "was my refusal to let her into my home to inspect my curtains. She wasn't invited, so she called 911. The sergeant glanced from me to Brenda, then back again, a flicker of something, an understanding, irritation, possibly disbelief across his face. "Curtains?" he asked. "And apparently my curtain rod finials," I added. "A critical detail, it seems." Another officer stepped up, flipping through a notepad. He looked like he was working very hard not to laugh. "She also claimed you were barricaded and requested special forces and an airlift," he said, deadpan. I raised both hands slightly in mock surrender. "As you can see," I said, "no barricade, just me, my coffee, and allegedly subversive window treatments." The sergeant exhaled slowly, like someone realizing they'd just committed half a dozen units to referee a fight about drapery. He turned to look at Brenda, who was still in full meltdown mode, demanding to speak to whoever's in charge of this woefully inadequate response. The scope of the emergency: multiple squad cars, a fire truck, an ambulance, and a helicopter was starting to look less like a tribute to Brenda's authority, a broken bar, and more like a monument to her delusion. Across the street, neighbors stood slack-jawed. The focus was no longer on the supposed threat, it was on her. Slowly but surely, the spotlight began to shift from the supposed dangerous resident to the increasingly unhinged-looking HOA president, now demanding special forces over a dispute about curtain DA copyright core. Brenda, still glowing in the wash of flashing emergency lights, was poised for her moment of glory. And she got tied, just not the way she imagined. The tension among the officers dissolved quickly as I calmly explained the situation, how Brenda had arrived unannounced, demanded entry to inspect my living room, and how I had declined based on, basic property rights. I stuck to the facts, omitting the part where I nearly choked on my coffee at the word airlift. I even offered to show them the HOA bylaws and no mention of interior decor inspections. no curtain clause, and certainly no SWAT override provision. The sergeant, professional but visibly done with the whole circus, politely declined the offer to come inside. Still, he leaned through the doorway for a quick glance and saw exactly what was there. No barricades, no hostages, no weapons, just a coffee mug on a side table and the deeply controversial curtain rods. His radio crackled. A brief exchange followed, likely with dispatch, or more accurately, with Sarah, who was probably relaying Brenda's dramatic dialogue in real time, complete with her calls for elite intervention and medevac. The sergeant's eyes flicked to Brenda, who was still berating a young officer for not securing the perimeter properly and insisting that I was some kind of manipulative mastermind. He walked over to her, his expression shifting into something harder and far more official. "Ms. McLaughlin," he said, his tone calm but cutting through her theatrics like a scalpel, "we need to discuss the nature of your 911 calls." Brenda lit up as though he'd just handed her a microphone. She straightened, radiant with vindication. "Yes, Sergeant. Thank you. Finally, someone is taking this seriously. That man," she said, jabbing a finger at me, "is a menace." "Ma'am," the sergeant said, smoothly cutting her off, "based on our assessment, Mr. Harrison has committed no criminal offense. This appears to be a civil dispute regarding HOA rules. There's no evidence he is armed. There is no barricade. And there was certainly no justification for a tactical response or a medical airlift." Brenda froze, the color drained from her face so completely that her mint green pantsuit suddenly seemed to glow. "But I felt threatened," she stammered. "He was hostile. I demanded a proper response. I specifically requested special forces." "Exactly, ma'am," another officer said, stepping forward with a printout. "Judging by the grim look on his face, I guessed it was a preliminary cost estimate. You initiated a significant emergency response, multiple police units, fire, EMS, and aerial support based on statements that are, frankly, unsubstantiated." That word "and unsubstantiated" hung in the air like a siren of its own. Then the fire chief strolled over, arms folded, voice cool. "That helicopter time isn't cheap, ma'am. Neither is pulling a full ladder crew off active duty to babysit a non-emergency." Brenda stared at him, blinking like she'd been slapped with a wet towel. "But to Broken Bar it was an emergency," she whispered. "I told the dispatcher." She understood me. "Oh, Sarah understood her all right. She understood how to give you just enough rope," I muttered under my breath. The sergeant nodded slightly. "The dispatcher," he said, voice now purely procedural, "recorded your specific request for a SWAT team, special forces, and an airlift due to stress. Under city protocol, that triggers a Tier 1 emergency response. That's not a small thing." Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, words failed her. "And so, as the helicopter circled overhead, as firemen leaned on their truck and paramedics quietly packed up unused gear, the great decorating incident of Willow Creek Estates reached its climax, and not with a dramatic rescue, but with an administrative debrief, a warning about misuse of emergency services, and the dawning horror on Brenda's face as the consequences of her theatrics began to land. It wasn't the spotlight she wanted, but it was the one she'd earned. "Under city and county ordinances," the sergeant continued, his voice now edged with official gravity, "initiating a false emergency report, especially one that diverts this level of public resources, carry significant penalties. That includes full cost recovery for every asset deployed." Brenda blinked. "False report?" But I was scared. "He wouldn't let me see his finials." "That's against the rules," one of the paramedics, who had been standing by with professional patience, added dryly. "Ma'am, your vitals were perfectly normal. No sign of fainting or acute stress. Thought you a Broken Bar once the bill arrives. That might change." And just like that, the realization began to settle. The smug triumph on Brenda's face melted into a wide-eyed mask of horror. The neighbors, still gathered along the sidewalks and porches, weren't alarmed anymore. They were captivated. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. "She called all thieves a Broken Bar over curtains," Mrs. Henderson whispered to her husband, who just shook his head slowly. The reckoning had begun. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was a Broken Bar spectacular. Brenda was formally cited for misuse of emergency services and filing a false police report. The city councilor recently keen on cracking down after a rash of costly swatting incidents made her a very public example. Then came the bill. Sarah, ever the consummate professional, had ensured that every single expense was meticulously itemized. Person hours for each officer, mileage, helicopter fuel, which, as the fire chief pointed out, burns through cash as fast as it does jet fuel, administrative processing, standby EMS deployment. The grand total? Well into 5 figures. Brenda tried to push back. She claimed victimhood, that she had genuinely feared for her safety, that her actions were justified. But the recordings of her escalating, unhinged 911 calls told another story, one where she demanded special forces and a medevac for a man with non-compliant window treatments. The HOA board called an emergency session. Between the public embarrassment, the crushing city fines, and the looming threat of skyrocketing insurance premiums, the vote was unanimous. Brenda was removed as president. They even began proceedings to hold her personally responsible for any costs the HOA might incur because of her stunt. The infamous Willow Creek Estate's internal ambience compliance mandate was never spoken of again. Our curtains remain blissfully uninspected. Sarah and I watched it all unfold from the sidelines with a quiet, satisfied kind of amusement. She never once broke protocol as she simply gave Brenda exactly what she asked for. No malice, no trickery, just professional, by-the-book escalation in response to an increasingly ridiculous list of demands. And the best part? Brenda knew, or at least suspected, who the calm, eerily efficient dispatcher had been, but there was nothing she could prove. Sarah had just done her job, flawlessly. Life in Willow Creek Estate settled into a much more breathable normal. No more clipboard shadows looming over flower beds. People started planting boulder gardens. Our welcome mat stayed defiantly Sahara sunset, and me, I installed a new set of curtain rod finials, flamboyant, tastefully obnoxious, and absolutely, gloriously unapproved, just because I could. So if you ever find yourself staring down an out-of-control HOA Karen, remember this story, and remind them, if you're going to call 911, make sure it's an actual emergency, because you never know who'll pick up and they just might give you exactly what you asked for.